Welcome to the Falling Walls Plenary Table, promoting gender equality for innovation.
A very warm welcome to everybody in this room and in front of the screens. Welcome to our table on gender equality for innovation. At this Falling Walls Circle, global leaders in research, business, policymaking and media will exchange ideas and solutions for today's most pressing issues in science and society. In this panel, we will approach the issue of promoting gender equality for innovation through the lens of different perspectives and experiences. We would like to find out what policies and actions can help us to realize our full potential as a society to tackle the following questions. In what ways are innovations better and more sustainable while all genders are involved in their development? And second, who needs to change to promote gender equality for innovation? I am very pleased to welcome 5 very special guests here on stage. First of all, Mrs. Kumsal Bayazit. She is Chief Executive Officer of Elsevier, and she has held multiple positions with the ALTS Group before, responsible for driving strategic initiatives, technology strategy, and portfolio management. Welcome. Tatjana König is member of the Executive Board of the Körber Foundation in Hamburg. Having worked in politics and for the public relations agency Scholz & Friends, she also founded her own communications company. In 2013, she took over the management of the Falling Walls Foundation in Berlin for several years, so it's kind of her home game. Monika Lessl is Executive Director of Bayer Foundation and SVP, Head of Corporate R&D and Social Innovation at Bayer. Welcome. Then we have Simone Menne. She is one of the top managers in Europe, currently being non-executive board member for BMW, Henkel, Deutsche Post, DHL, GCI and Russell Reynolds. She also owns an art gallery in Kiel and is the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Germany. And last but not least, directly from America, Londa Schiebinger. She is John L. Hinz Professor of History of Science at Stanford University, and she serves as Director for Gendered Innovations in Science, Health, Medicine, Engineering and Environment. And she is author of several books, among others, Has Feminism Changed Science? My name is Stefanie Molthagen-Schnöring. I am Professor for Business Communication at University in Berlin and at the moment Vice President for Research and Transfer at this university. That's really nice to have this all-female panel here. I'm really happy about it. So, in order to answer our key question, in what ways are innovations better and more sustainable when all genders are involved in their development, I would like all of you to give a short statement. And in this statement, please name 1 or 2 areas where you think promoting gender equality is crucial for creating innovation and why. And I would like to start with you, Kumsal.
Thank you, Stefanie. I think when it comes to gender equality or any kind of equality, there are rarely silver bullets. We know that. We have to approach it systemically. And for gender equality, in my view, 3 really important things is to factor in sex and gender into the research. That's really Londa's expertise, and I think it's critical. The second one is gender representation, and whether that's in researchers, research leaders, or editorial board members to get gender equality and representation. And then to get there, thirdly, is to support early career researchers with the right culture, the right psychological safety, the right inclusive environment so they can flourish and stay in the game.
Thank you very much for your statement. So, Tatjana, in your view, what are things you can do to promote gender equality, and why is it important for innovations?
Well, it's basic math, really. 50% or more than 50% of the world's population are female. So to leave that section out is, just not wise, and we shouldn't. And as Christine Lagarde once said, if there had been more Lehman sisters and not only Lehman brothers, we might not have the crisis the way we had, because we all know that in the end of the day, mixed teams, with different attitudes, different characteristics are more successful. There's a lot of research about that. And so I think true innovation can only happen if we involve as many different types, of people, and leaving out such a great section still is a real loss. We could be, further on many paths if we had started to try and get gender equality much earlier.
Thank you very much. Monika.
Yeah, from my perspective, what has been said is that teams which are highly diverse are more efficient, have better outcome, and are more innovative. But what I want to stress is that it's not enough just bringing in minorities, and I think it shouldn't stop at gender. Yeah, of course, it's also different ethnic backgrounds and so on and so forth. But it will not be enough just to bring them in. It's about giving power, and this is for me a question on leadership. So the leadership style has to change and empower all the groups. And then it's a question of culture. Yeah? If people are not allowed to speak up in a setting, it doesn't make any sense to bring them in. So it's about empowerment and leadership to bring this to life and to make it flourish.
Thanks a lot. Simone.
Well, I think the two areas I feel where it's very important, especially in Germany, is Boardroom. And this will reflect everything we heard until now, because the tone from the top just makes the difference. And if you have a different culture there and people who believe that diversity makes a change and it brings more innovation, then it makes sense. And the other area, maybe the grassroots, I think we should look a lot more for female founders, because there we get innovative ideas normally coming out from different experiences. Female founders do a lot more in care work and in, let's say, the more social part of innovation. So mix them with the male founders, and that would be the two areas I would look for.
Thank you. Londa, what is your experience, and especially from your research, of course?
So I like to think of this as three fixes. So first we need to fix the numbers, which is what people here have been talking about. Bring in more women, bring in ethnic minorities, people who are underrepresented. Then secondly, we need to fix the institutions. It's no good bringing in new people if we have the same structures. We need to make the structures so that everyone's careers can flourish. And then thirdly, the part that I have devoted my work to is fixing the knowledge. How do we really integrate sex, gender, and intersectional analysis into all of our science and engineering? We have very important areas today like AI and robotics, and we need to make sure as these new products and services come online that they're really going to work for everyone across all of society and not just a privileged few.
So thank you very much for your interesting statements. I think we have a lot of food for thought now. Londa, may I just ask you, if we talk about innovations, can you give us examples for a truly gender-responsive innovation? What is a truly gender-responsive innovation? What do we talk about?
Well, I think, I'm not sure what gender, what you're talking about. I want something that works for everyone. So when we say sex analysis, I think I'll just take the example of drugs. So 10 drugs were withdrawn from the US market in recent years because of life-threatening health effects, and 8 of those were worse for women. So when you develop these drugs, not only do they cost billions of dollars and therefore are a burden on the economy, but they tend to harm human beings. So we can't get the research wrong. So what we need to do really is to have everyone, not just women, but everyone understand for drug development how to analyze sex, for instance.
Thanks a lot, Monika, coming from Bayer. What is your experience? How do you deal with these gender aspects in your research and when designing drugs?
Yeah, I think it's very important early on. I mean, reprotox, for example, is a very important element of all the research. But maybe one area I want to stress is kind of the whole field on women's health, so which has been also underfunded. So Bayer actually is a leader in women's health research, but it's more or less one of the very, very few that is remaining, because most of the companies went on oncology and other areas, which are in the end more profitable. So I think research in that field on women's health, gynecological diseases, I mean, just for example, endometriosis is a higher disease burden. It's affecting 1 in 10 women. And so we have no early diagnostics right now, only invasive diagnostic. And also, I mean, there are now some treatment options, but there is a high need for innovation. So, and I think this is also in terms of gender equality and innovation, we need innovation also for 50% of our population. So that's an important, very close to my heart, so where I also worked in my previous life. And I really hope that we bring all the new technologies now also in that field. That's something I really would like to advocate for.
Thank you. Simone, you mentioned different areas where diverse teams can make a difference. Let's take an example, for example, sustainability. Can you briefly explain, by using an example from your own professional life, how sustainability could be increased by having more gender diverse management staff, for example?
Well, there are actually studies, long-term studies, one from MIT, where diverse teams, meaning diverse, not only gender, but also young and older people, really look more for sustainability because they bring in the future. And if you have an all-male engineering view, you may just look at technology. And that's not bad as such. It's just this monoculture which will foster this way of only technology. And there is definitely better risk management from diverse teams. And better risk management very often also means more sustainability, because you don't go for the short term. There we come back to the Lehman sisters or brothers. So a mix, because we also, and I think that is important too, all female teams would be as bad as all male teams, because they may be too much on the side of taking care and not taking risk. And that is more how we are socialized. So I think we really have to say diversity as such is so important for innovation.
Thank you. Kumsal, do you have an example from your professional life where diverse teams make this difference, just mentioned by Simone?
Oh, I have, many, many examples, and maybe the example I'll give that I'm really proud of is talking about, women in drug development and taking into account women. Let's talk about how we teach anatomy at schools. Anatomy is very much taught on the Northern European male body, and that's been the tradition for hundreds of years. And we're working with one of our teams, 3D4 Medical, to actually release a 3D model for female anatomy and also anatomy for different races for the first time at the end of this year. And the team that came up with that idea and actually executed was an incredibly diverse team at Elsevier. I think if we didn't have the men and women, people from different racial backgrounds, that idea would not have come together. And it turns out it's not very easy actually to define how to teach anatomy for the female body or for taking into account with race. So that's a great example of people bringing different vantage points and perspectives to really, hopefully, for the next generation of medical students to learn anatomy, looking at it from different perspectives and not just the male anatomy.
And if I may, that is also important for the car industry, because accident tests are very often done with male dummies with the average size and will not work for very small or very tall people. So also here you have to look at anatomy and diversity. Yeah.
Or when planning cities and you plan the city from a male perspective, there are differences between, how men and women go through the city, and I think that there are many examples, of course. So I would really like to elaborate on these examples so that we can learn from them. And Tatjana, looking at you, you also said that it's so important to have these diverse teams. What do you think? We have diverse teams, and like Monika, like Simone mentioned, for example, at the board level. But what about the team levels? So I think you are also working in an organization where there were many women working, but there were more men on the top level. What do you think? How can innovations be generated on all these levels?
Well, actually, at the Kerber Foundation, we have quite a good mix. So we actually do have the majority of females working at the foundation, and at the sort of top level, there's me and two male colleagues, but we have the level below, it's 50-50. So I think we're on a good way there, but it's a very conscious decision, and that comes back to what has been mentioned by all of you, really. It's about leadership, it's about wanting to go there. And taking action. We noticed, for example, it makes a difference, how we, if we are hiring someone, how do we describe the position we are, looking at, things like that. And also, of course, to have role models, but to accept as an organization. And I think if the area of foundations in Germany, if we look at that. The majority of the employees are female, but the majority of the leadership is still male. Mm-hmm. And I think it has to be a very conscious decision, and you have to take concrete steps. And it's the same to say, let's say, for university research. I mean, if thinking of a practical example from my daily business, we have a prize, the Deutsche Studienpreis, for excellent PhD students, and with time, I mean, looking at the past 10 years, the majorities are now given to female PhD students. But if we look ahead and looking at who in the end ends up as a professor at university, there's the reverse picture, and there are many areas where I think we just very consciously have to change the way we do HR as well.
There has been a recent study that in Europe, and especially in Germany, there are less than 30% female researchers. So I think that Germany is at the bottom of the list, considering all the other European states. So this was really shocking. What is your experience, because you have seen it over the years? What has developed?
Well, women professors at universities, it's an interesting topic. When I started out, there were no other women professors of history. When I did my PhD at Harvard, there were no women to study with. So, but now in my generation, I think the Stanford department is maybe around 50% women, at least 40% women professors. And now we're working much more on racial diversity. But it really has changed, and with the women coming in to the discipline of history, we saw new areas researched. So the whole field of women's history or gender history was not something 20 years ago, and now it is a substantial field. We have journals in the field, and in addition, there was body history. Everyone had been looking at intellectual history, the history of the mind, but not the body. What is our bodily experience? The history of sexuality is something else that changed as the demographics changed. So I do want to make the point that as you bring more women in, you get changes, but it's also important, and I'll come back to this probably several times, that everybody, all professors, understand sex, gender, and ethnic analysis. it's something that is not attached to our X or Y chromosome. This kind of analysis is a skill that everyone needs to learn.
But how can you integrate it into the curricula? For example, I am working at a technical university, and in many technical subjects, it's not a subject yet.
Well, this is something we need to do. So if we really want to bring change to science, we need to look at the science infrastructure, which I see as having three basic pillars. One is funding agencies that need to ask for this kind of sex and gender analysis in the proposals, because that will drive your professors to include it in the curriculum. So the European Commission, as you may know, has made this the default. You are expected to use this methodology, which leads to excellence. And the second pillar here then is the universities. We need to develop the methods for like mechanical engineering. Computer scientists are doing a lot now. We understand the power of AI and the harms of AI. So there are courses which embed ethics, which includes sex, gender, ethnic analysis in them. In computer science, we need more. My electrical engineering friends say, you know, can't really do it, but I'm sure they can. Medical school, we need to be training your researchers that come out. And then the third pillar to get this whole science infrastructure to work is peer-reviewed journals. So at the end of the process, when selecting excellent articles for publication, they need to be checked to see if the proper analytics are there. And journals like Nature, Cell, which is one of your premier journals, The Lancet, these journals have these guidelines now. So I think we're really moving along. I hope Germany will catch up soon.
Yes, me too. So, Simone, you have the experience from different companies and from different fields. So what do you think, what is crucial, what is crucial if you would like to foster innovations in diverse teams? What do you need? Which are circumstances? Is it the kind of company culture? What is your experience?
Well, important is first to say innovation has to be everywhere. So you cannot say, and I tried to make a digital lab and say, okay, this is the area where we have innovation. That's not a good idea. So you better have innovation everywhere. So you need a culture which is innovative, and it will be a speak-up culture, absolutely true. It will be a culture which is risk-taking. And how do we make it diverse? Well, since for years it didn't work in Germany, I'm an absolute fan for quota. I'm very brutal there now. In the beginning, when I was young, I was still believing in women will be there because they are good. But the stereotypes, the unconscious bias are still so huge in our heads, female as well as male heads, that we have to work with a quota. We have to force diverse teams. So just make it a mathematical exercise and say, okay, I want to have these competencies, and then I look for gender, age, and different areas, background, international. So that would be a way to foster innovation in diverse teams. Of course, there is also the way, how do you acquire people? We made the mistake once, and it was my department. I was responsible for IT. We wanted to have a female department head, desperately, because we had all male department heads. And then somebody who does unconscious bias training showed me what we wrote into the journals and the way we were looking for. And that was a strong person and a very consistent person, whatever. And she was asking me, and I said, well, we are looking for a male person, do we? Yeah. So that is also very important. Be conscious, be aware. So that goes from one, look for formulas to put diverse teams together. You will always find female talents. There is no excuse when anybody is telling me there are no females. And you will always find talents also with a migration background, and so that is not an excuse. So make that, and make the unconscious bias aware in the whole company.
Monika, you work in a multinational company, so are there any differences between different states, between continents, considering this question?
Well, I think there are always differences because you have cultural differences, and I think you better be aware of in order you can deal with it. But I see this as a big advantage. Yeah? So we have better results because we have different perspectives. And if we want to get all equal, then what's the point? So innovation lives from these perspectives. But I want to make also a point to what Simone mentioned earlier. Yeah? So for me, the leadership level, if you want to make a change, is very important. Yeah? And so I have to say I'm quite proud that at Bayer we decided until 2030 to become gender equal at all levels. Yeah? So especially also on the managerial levels. So, and I think this is a very important prerequisite. And we also started now, as I have two hats, one in Bayer and one is the foundation, we also started a partnership with Falling Walls on women leaders in science, because it's that leadership level that I think which we need to address. And that's on one hand of encouraging for me young women of going that career, and the network I think is very important. But then a third element which I want to mention is the visibility aspect. Yeah? So what I noticed is it's very important to get visibility. And I mean, most prominent maybe is the Nobel Prize, where already this year we have only one woman of all winners. Yeah? And if you look on chemistry, physics and medicine, we have between 96 and 98% male. So we had this morning Emmanuel Charpentier, and these are wonderful examples, but we need definitely more. And if you are on any nomination committee, so I am glad I am on quite some, but I always make sure that we have enough really great women on that list. Yeah? So I think that's also something, the visibility at all levels, be it special projects in a company or be it awards in academia or whatever. Yeah? So that would be my plea also to everyone who has influence, go for it. Yeah.
It's also what Tatjana mentioned, considering the prize you are giving for scientific achievement, that you take it into regard. Yeah, and there is the question I would like to ask, because you're also a communication expert, and you say visibility is so important. And my feeling is, but perhaps I see all the great women around me, that I see many of them, but obviously they were not visible enough. So what do you think, what can be done to make them more visible?
Well, I think well, there are two sides of the coin. The one thing is, as an organization, an institution, a company, to actually have that in mind and give opportunity and actually call, talent, female talent, call them and actually actively invite them to join a panel, to go out there, hold a lecture or whatever. And on the other side of the coin is to, as a woman, to actually do it. And I can, and have an environment where especially young women, feel we believe in them, and they can do it. And even if they do it in a different way, it's just the right thing to do it. Go out there and just do it.
Thanks a lot. So I would like to address the audience. So if you have any questions, please. We have in 5 minutes the opportunity that you can also ask your questions to the panelists. I think let's take in 5 minutes if it's fine, because then we open the discussion. I only have one final question here from the podium for all of you. So we are here at the Falling Walls conference, and I would like to know what walls needs to come down for us to achieve this gender equality for innovation now. Which wall should come down, Kumsal?
To me, it's two walls: the wall of numbers in representation and the wall of culture. And if I look at the wall of numbers, let me just take researchers. We just published a gender report last year. There are now 6 women scientists for every 10 men scientists. That number was 4 to 10 15 years ago, so progress is being made. And if you look at early career researchers, defined as people who start publishing in 2014, that number is 7.5 to 10. So there is progress, and in Portugal, that number is almost at parity. In Germany, unfortunately, is behind the pack. And there are things that are working that we can actually learn from. Germany can learn from Portugal, and we can continue to move those numbers. So the wall has to come down. It has to be 101. And then there's the cultural, which is, I am a big fan of Amy Edmondson's research in psychological safety, because I don't think it focuses on one dimension of diversity. It focuses on creating a safe environment. So the walls of not feeling safe has to come down, so everybody feels safe in contributing their ideas, in failing, in learning from that failure, in moving on, and that's the way we're going to get truly diverse teams, is if people feel safe speaking up their minds.
Thank you very much. Londa, you already mentioned a few walls, but...
Yes, so I think we need to push through the wall of kind of gender-blind research. So I'm in Silicon Valley, yes, and the companies are busy creating things. And already in 2012, we found that Google Translate, which is so important for us all, defaults to the masculine pronoun in English. So I was in Spain. I don't read Spanish. I was interviewed by some newspapers. I went back and put the article through Google Translate. And it was Londa Schiebinger. He said, he thought, and occasionally it wrote. And I thought to myself, I have devoted my life to being an intellectual woman, and suddenly the she thought has turned to he thought. So again, we are adding the he to the database, and any of the machine learning will associate intellectual activity with men in the way that natural language processing works and returns to us the human results. So I would like to smash through the wall and bring us a world where we really think about gendered innovations and think about how gender analysis can improve our products, like all the robots that are running around.
Thank you. Simone.
Well, two things. One, I think education. We have to start very, very early to educate girls and boys the same way, and getting out of this social trap that girls are pink and obedient, and boys are blue and just fighting. That is maybe very much German, but this is still the case. And the next thing is legal parity, so that parental leave, for example, we treat male as same way as female. In Germany, we still have a splitting of taxes, which is fostering the old model of role model and women being at home. So for the legal one and for the education, I go through the wall.
Thank you.
For me, it's the breaking the wall of stereotypes. Yeah, so that in both ways. Yeah, I mean that women are more caring and males are maybe more courageous. So let's come over this, and that all professions are open for different gender, and it really depends on the personality of the individual, what fits best. So that would be something to be broken going forward.
Thank you.
Well, talking about communication, I think there's also breaking the walls of gender stereotypes in the media coverage. If we are talking about, descriptions of female leaders or female researchers, vice versa, the way male CEOs or experts are covered, and I think that goes out to, it's a question of unconscious bias, certainly. I don't think any of the journalists want consciously to do that, but if you look at the articles and the other research, it's very much about still, different way of communicating when women are successful in what they're doing and being a role model, and it's, I think, important to have equality there as well.
Thank you very much for all your power for breaking the walls. And now I think it's the time for Adam.
Yes, hello. Hi.
There he is. Because
So yes, I know we already have an audience question already queued up, which was over here. So if we can just get a microphone over, and a reminder to the audience to keep your questions brief so we can get as many in as possible.
Sure. First thing, I think yesterday was a great day. We had all women winning almost all the awards. But I think one wall that we really need to break is financial inclusion. I'm a woman-led company, and I think financial inclusion is something that is so, so important. So what is your thoughts on it?
Okay. Monika. Yeah, I think that you hit a very important aspect. And I mean, if you look at the data, only funding of venture capital goes only to 2% to companies being led by women, and 9% where one woman is in the leadership. And this is then also due, and this comes back to also my leadership topic, is that because only about 9% are venture partners who make the decisions on the funding are women. And then only 2% of them are kind of major owner of the venture capital company. So, and I think this is where we also have to make the change, so that more partners are women and taking the decisions, so that it's better financial inclusion. And then the other part for me would be to have also better financial education early on. And there are also great startups working also, especially with women, also here in Berlin, to have a good financial education. Because again, I think being successful from an economic perspective is nothing which is bad and to be ashamed of. It's great, and let's go for it. So fully to your point, super important.
Maybe I could add to that. There was a very interesting study that came out just recently in the Harvard Business Review, and we know that in the US, only 13% of the patents are held by women. But it's also true that women tend to innovate for women and men tend to innovate for men. So the authors calculated that if men and women had equally created patents from 1976 to the present, we would have 6,500 more innovations for women. I think this is just astonishing, and so patents need all the financial support, it needs the venture funding, it needs all of these sorts of things.
I'll turn now to a question from the online audience. This questioner says, I think to achieve equality, a crucial aspect is to look at inequality from an intersectional approach. So how do we incorporate that intersectional lens when we're looking at the questions we're discussing today?
I could take that. Well, we've had some very interesting studies of intersectionality in facial recognition. So intersectionality asks that you look at several categories at once, and then these authors also added a third category. It gets kind of complicated for research. But the facial recognition example is that Black women's faces were not seen. So facial recognition has only a 1% failure rate on white men's faces. But then as, you know, then I can't remember if it's Black men next or white women, but once you get down to Black women, it's a 35% failure rate. So we as humans come with many, many dimensions. We don't have just gender, we don't have just ethnicity. I'm glad you mentioned age. There are just many dimensions, socioeconomic status, and intersectionality asks us to look at the cumulative disadvantage of being at one of these intersections. So I think this study of facial recognition by Timnit Gebru and Joy Bolamwini is a really very good study for that.
Yeah, but
I believe
maybe I can just add to that point. I think it really depends on the training data, and I think this is where we had the discussion just before. I mean, we have to make sure that the training sets are also inclusive. Yeah? I also had recently the experience on using Google Translate. Yeah? So we had it on the table, and all the men's voices were perfectly translated by my voice. It wasn't recognized. Yeah? So that was really a bias in the system because there were less training data. Yeah? So it's really very, very important that we look at it from all the dimensions and have the right set of training data.
Absolutely. And for voice recognition, African Americans in the US have a real problem because African American English is slightly different than other English, and it will be very misunderstood and sometimes even blanked out by the voice recognition systems.
I believe we had a question over here. Yes.
Well, we have covered many areas and many instruments how to improve gender equality. One area you have not yet addressed, and that is the question, how can we win more women to really act on these issues together and stand up? Because very often it is easier to convince a male to go after gender equality, and sometimes it's hard to win our co-women to act on the same lines.
One is hopefully that we strengthen young women, and I have several mentees where I'm really proud that they are speaking up already, and I see a change in age comparing to me and my time. Secondly, I think very important are really role models. I met a young lady, we had an interview together, and she at that time said, "No, I don't go on the street, I don't go to demonstrations, why shall I?" And for me it was, well, of course you have to be, I'm 61 years old, so we did that. So give that example to speak up, to stand for other women, and you may all remember maybe also the discussion with Ivana Trump, Mrs. Merkel, and I think Madame Lagarde, where Mrs. Merkel was asked if she is a feminist. And of course she should have said yes, because that gives a good example. So that would help.
If I can maybe bring a different perspective on this too, I think men and women all have to advocate for gender equality. I think we also have to be careful not to put that burden entirely on younger women, because it is a burden to do the work. And I see, as I was coming up the ranks, I was usually the only woman, and I was always asked to lead and to do everything when I had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old and a full-time job and a career progression. So I think we just need to be mindful based on life stages where the young women are, and how much of the burden we as leaders need to take now that we're in leadership positions, and how much of the burden of day-to-day efforts goes to people who may be going through life stages where it's just a little too much to advocate for gender equality too.
I'd like to chime in. Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, what I found very helpful are networks, and then you can have that on different levels, yeah. So I'm on networks on women on boards and so on, and this is really helpful. And I mean, there is also like the thought behind it, okay, if you haven't helped a woman a day, so it was a bad day, yeah? So it's really having this idea of supporting each other, and this can be bringing, I mean, depending on where you are sitting, it can be changing the law, it can be whatever it is, helping to get a position. So there are so many ways, but I think utilizing networks is super powerful. Yeah.
So I have to pay attention to the time, so I think we can make one more question.
Yes, so I would ask as well, we mentioned at the beginning of the talk how all genders need to be included in the conversation. And so how do we include people who don't necessarily fit easily into the binary of gender and sex, be they trans, intersex, or non-binary individuals?
A complex question at the end. Londa.
Yes, so there are so many things going on in this area. For example, our National Institutes of Health has just asked our national academies to define the categories of gender that will be used in like medical intake records, because it's very important for medicine, as you would know, to know if someone is transgender, because they may be taking high levels of some kind of hormone or something like that. Everyone should be treated for their very specific biological situation. And then transgender is so important as we develop something like facial recognition, coming back to that example. If a person is transitioning, again, they won't be recognized properly by the technology. So at Stanford, for instance, we all put our pronouns. We don't assume any pronouns so that people can be addressed with honor and dignity. And I think it's just a marvelous direction we're headed in.
Thank you. We have only 20 seconds left, so I think that we make a final point here. I thank you all very much for being guests here today at this circle. I think we discussed many different aspects on how diversity can make a difference when it comes to innovation. We have seen many different examples, but we had also learned that there are still things to be done. So we have talked about the importance of leadership, about how visibility is an issue, and role models are an issue, and networks are an issue. And that there are a few walls which should come down, like numbers, culture, stereotypes. So I think we all have a lot to do now. I feel very energized after this talk. I hope you too, all in the audience and on the table. Thank you again, and have a great day at the Falling Walls.
Thank you.